So we're here on Roosevelt Island, formerly known as Mahanock Island, formerly known as Hogs Island, formerly known as Welfare Island, formerly known as Blackwell's Island, and then now known as Roosevelt Island, named in 1973 for FDR. So I'm delighted that you're here, although I feel like you're a little bit early for the cherry blossoms, which will be coming in a couple of weeks, so I invite you all back, assuming you're all New Yorkers, but the island is absolutely ringed by pink blossoms in a couple of weeks, so please come back and take a look at the kind of beautiful, wonderful, and weird island that we're on right now. A bit about Cornell Tech. We are ourselves a bit of a startup. We're here we celebrated our 10-year anniversary last June when we won the international RFP to build a new applied sciences campus for New York City, smack dab in the middle of the river. We have 8 programs here. We're a graduate-only institution. We have about 524. We have exactly 524 students and 105 PhDs, 8 programs, everything from computer science to operations research, health tech, and of course my favorite, urban tech. Urban tech is one of our newest initiatives. We have a threefold agenda here. One is to advance knowledge. We have a new and first of its kind program for master's students studying urban technology that we launched about 2-ish years ago. We graduated our first cohort last May, all of whom, knock wood, are gainfully employed. And number 2, we undertake our own applied research. We're also lucky to have our urbanist in residence, Anthony Townsend, here, who leads our research efforts. We publish our own research. Go to urban.tech.cornell.edu to take a look at what we're doing. And then lastly, we undertake ecosystem engagement, bringing together people such as yourselves here on campus to really advance thought and knowledge. And where we like to be, and this is something I'll be really interested in hearing this conversation, at the intersection of academia, industry, and government, and finding ways of kind of focusing on those gaps that often exist. And I'm really delighted that one of our programs that I'm proudest of is our Urban Tech Fellows program. We have an incredible cohort of folks, one of whom is Greg Lindsay. I couldn't be more delighted to have Greg join us this year to advance this discussion and also engage all of you. So with that, welcome, Greg. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. It was very kind. It's a pleasure to have all of you here on Roosevelt Island to join us for the first really sort of in-person public programming for almost a year-long initiative that we're calling here the Metaverse Metropolis, really looking at the intersection of extended reality, XR, both augmented and virtual, with the built environment, with cities and with governance. And while most of our sessions are focused particularly on the intersection of cities and augmented reality, the various companies like Niantic, which makes Pokemon Go and is building out their own visual positioning system, or Snap, who's a participant of ours, or of course Apple if it builds its headset, and Meta and others with these ambitions, looking at what happens when virtual information and virtual worlds are overlaid on the physical one. But today we're having a great discussion with our partners from Spectra Cities and Numena to really sort of flip that around and look at what can designers of both virtual environments and the urban realm learn from each other, and how can we use virtual environments like the ones that Spectra and Numena are building to basically sort of guide and accelerate the development of the urban realm. And I won't quote you the more than half of humanity lives in cities, except I guess I just did, but obviously you saw the Secretary General of the United Nations saying that we need to do everything everywhere all at once to basically decarbonize the built environment, which of course has a massive urban component to it in terms of how do we build more sustainably and densely, and do so in a rapid fashion there to house the growing population. So there's some really interesting pertinent uses of these tools. It's not just a case, unlike the folks over who are making Horizon Worlds, which is a technology in search of a purpose. There are a lot of metaverse technologies that actually can help us solve some of these pressing challenges now. So we're going to delve into that today. We have a 2-hour program with you. We're going to basically do 2 sessions here. After that, we have great tech demos from our friends at Geopipe and In Situ and Leia. In Situ, I should note, I just finished our virtual session with a cohort of more than a dozen current and former public officials, where we talked about how to use technologies like theirs to basically see the future skyline of New York, to basically help with community engagement and sort of break down that skepticism that applies to almost anything proposed in the built environment. So I would encourage all of you after our session to check out their demos some more. We'll have a happy hour and networking event over the graduate after this at 5, and then for the folks who are here from the XR Guild, which we're really happy to host, they're a great organization, which I'm proud to be a member of, that is really sort of designing a framework for being ethical practitioners in XR and sort of opting into that. So they're going to be hosting a meetup upstairs from 6 to 9, which I'm told folks can drop in on as well, so you can learn more about their work. So it's great to have you here for the first annual Metaverse Day here on Roosevelt Island. All right, well, with that, we'll start our program here. So first up, we're going to have Ryan and Andreea here are going to come up here. There's a brief presentation. I got a clicker here for Ryan to talk about what Spectra and Numena are building, and then I'll come up here with a panel of experts from both the urban and virtual realms, and we'll sort of discuss that, unpack it, and again, talk about sort of where these two disciplines can learn from each other. So, all right, where is Andreea and Ryan? There they are on this side. The floor is yours. Go.
Thanks for the intro, Greg, and it's really great to be here. First time in Roosevelt in a very long time, and a lot has changed. It's really beautiful. So, introduce the project, Spectra, and the collaboration that we have with Andreea and the tools that we're building to build better places. So, really quick on my background. I started my career here in New York City. I got a planning degree from Hunter College. And I interned and then later worked at the Department of Transportation in the bike and ped planning group. Ryan Russo's over here. Was my boss's boss, maybe boss's boss's boss at the time. And yeah, we were doing really great work at the time. It was about 50 miles of bike lanes per year and transforming tons of public spaces. I got to work on the closure of Times Square to automobile traffic and the opening of the pedestrian plazas there. That's that photo from there. I was a very young man there. After about a year and a half at the DOT, I left to start Social Bicycles, which was a bike share system that grew across North America, later on Europe and Australia. We were the first to do shared dockless bikes, and later on we introduced shared electric bikes with JUMP, and we grew that even further, and were acquired by Uber in 2018, and continued to grow with them, and I stayed there for about a year and a half. And left at the end of 2019. And in the process of deploying bike share systems all over the world, it was really great to impact cities. It was really great to see how the introduction of a new transportation mode really shaped behavior. My work at the DOT, it was really great to see what you could do when you close down space for cars and open up for people. But during that whole time, I was thinking, it's really hard just to introduce a few hundred bikes to a city or make cities slightly more bike friendly. It'd be really great if you started from the beginning and designed for people and designed for cyclists, and you're not working with an environment that was already heavily favoring the automobile. And so in the back of my mind the whole time is like, well, how would you build a city from scratch? How is that possible? And leaving Uber, I decided that's what I want to devote the rest of, the next chapter of my career and probably the rest of my life toward, figuring out better ways to make cities and better ways to make places. And so, I have an urban planning degree, I worked in planning, and usually when you talk to an audience of planners and you say you want to build new cities, the first question is, well, why can't we just fix existing cities? Why do we want to build new cities? Why can't we just fix existing places? And to that I say, it's great. Like, I spent more than 10 years of my career trying to make cities better. Anybody that's doing that work, it's good work, it's worthwhile work. But it's very, very hard to change existing places and retrofit. And what happened is the world is still needing new urbanized places. So in the US, what that means is usually instead of densifying in the urban core, you're spreading further and further into the suburban or rural periphery, where you're taking cheap land and converting it to stuff that looks a lot like that. Stuff that's very, very car dependent, very isolating, and very low quality of life. And that's in this sort of US context or European context. In the developing world, the story is a little bit different. Africa is going to add 1 billion new urban residents. Africa alone is going to add 1 billion new urban residents by 2050. And so they need new cities. They need new places to go. And so in both cases, we can either ignore the problem or just let sort of market forces guide the growth, or we can try to leapfrog these bad development patterns of the 20th century and adopt more sustainable development patterns, and more equitable development patterns, and more affordable development patterns. And we have a chance to do that if we kind of plan ahead and rethink the model. And so when you think of new cities, though, generally, you think of a lot of projects like this, these mega projects that have you know, a star architect attached, and maybe it's a country that wants to create a new capital city, or it's a big you know, big corporation that wants to create a new headquarters, or it's you know, a visionary billionaire that wants to, you know, create some special city of the future. And these are great. I actually think, you know, the line in particular got a lot of criticism. The line in the upper left there, it's as tall as the Empire State Building, and it's 110 miles long. So imagine a city that is one building that is as tall as the Empire State Building, 110 miles long. And so a lot of urbanists saw that and said, well, that's crazy and that's terrible. And you know, I think there's a lot of fair criticism there of these projects that are very top-down driven, but at least they're trying something new. You know, when we look at what we're building in the US particularly, and we have, you know, strip malls and single-family homes out forever, like taking a few outlandish attempts, to me, is at least a worthwhile enterprise, even if not all of these projects are gonna succeed. But, you know, new cities and new places aren't just these big mega projects. There's a lot of interesting other smaller projects that are working. So in the upper left cul-de-sac is an infill development project. It's in Tempe, Arizona. And when you think of Tempe, you don't think of like thriving, livable streets and bike friendliness. But they're building a car-free neighborhood in Tempe, adjacent to the light rail station, relatively near to the ASU campus. And there's actually a restriction on the lease that if you live there, you cannot have a car. And so they're building a mixed-use project. It's an architecture that's you know, very similar to kind of like a Mediterranean village. And they've done a really good job of promoting the project, building an audience for it, and they're in the process of finishing construction and leasing it out right now. The other thing you see quite a bit is these kind of new urbanist ideas taking place in resort areas. So Las Catalinas in Costa Rica is, again, like kind of a Middle Eastern village. And it's designed around wellness and sustainability and ecology. Same thing with the Honduras project and the Bali project, where you're seeing a desire of people to spend their vacation or extended periods of time closer to nature in these places that aspire to be more sustainable. Now, how sustainable are these places? I think that varies, and I think there's probably criticisms to be had for each approach. But at least there's kind of attempts on new forms and new models. And you know, new urbanism or bringing back older forms of development isn't even that new of a thing. It's been going on for decades of trying to reclaim the urban forms of the past, the walkable town center, the mixed-use residential and retail in the same place. And so that's been happening for decades, and I feel like it's accelerating now. It's really starting to resonate with people now. But all these are fairly typical residential or commercial developments that, you know, somebody acquired a land, they hired an architect and they built it. I think it's quite interesting now that you're seeing this other form of development that's a little bit more bottom up, that is communities forming and kind of building community around maybe a raw piece of land or even just around the idea of building together. And then kind of slowly, collectively designing and building a space together. So both Cabin and CityDAO, the project's founders, you know, acquired a piece of raw land, and they said, "Hey, I want to start building a community here. Who'd want to do this?" And each of them got thousands of people where this idea resonated with them. You know, they have a token, they have a Discord, an active Discord community. They do build weeks where they show up on the site and they add structures. And it's really sort of working, or at least working for those folks. They have co-living on the property, they do community dinners, and they're now expanding they're going from just having one site to having multiple, and really kind of building a decentralized city. And that's the goal of something like KIFT as well, where they started with vans and sort of van life, where you're going from one camping spot to another all across the American West. And now they're thinking about, okay, well, we have all these kind of camping spots, but how do we make it more formal, more long-term? How do we do a more formalized development? And you have it happening not only on raw pieces of land from scratch, you also have it happening in existing cities and existing places. So both Radish and Neighborhood are co-living experiments in the Bay Area. And in those cases, the neighborhoods, they want to do co-living, but that tends to be a kind of 20-something phenomenon. What happens when you get married? What happens when you have kids? And you want to still have the feeling of community, but you don't want to be crammed 40 people into a house. So now they're starting to take over multiple houses in the same neighborhood, deliberately co-locate in the same area, and kind of recreate or create and extend their communities. Or you have something like Maxwell, which is in New York City, where they opened up a third space, a public space. It's trying to bring back the idea of social clubs that used to be so popular 30, 40, 50 years ago, and have a network of these social clubs in New York where you kind of pop in and the community that comes from that. And finally, Boundless is a family-oriented project. I'll be spending the next 6 months of the next year here with Boundless, where they have destinations all over the world, and you kind of live in one spot for a couple months, move around. So your community is the people that are in the Boundless network, but you actually be changing place from every 2 to 3 months. And lastly, Esmeralda, similar sort of thing. It's designing communities that are for nomadic living, for experiences and building culture, and placemaking that is more similar to Las Catalinas, where you have urban, mixed use, kind of Italian hilltop type of places. So what all of these things are a different experiment in ways people come together, identify with shared common values, and then build out spaces together. And that's really what we're focused on. One, on using VR as a co-creation tool to test these ideas. So you have a community forming like that. How do you decide on what you're going to build? How do you test ideas in space and get agreement on it? And then two, what are the different economic systems that can come with that? So is it just a top-down landlord and renter relationship, or you can have more co-ownership and build equity in the place? And on that last page, most of the folks are experimenting with these different ownership models. So finally, we believe that city making needs a space for collective dreaming, and that building this way helps people reclaim agency and changes and redefines the real estate development process and the city building process. And with that, I'll pass it to Andreea, who can talk about her work at Numena and what she does to make these spaces and the tools she uses to facilitate this.
Hi, everyone. So speaking of the design process, I spent many years working as an architect here in the city. I worked for Robert Stern Architects and KPF, and I was left with many questions when it comes to the why and the how. And those were amazing experiences. I've learned almost everything I know about architecture, how to design and run a practice, but there was something about the why and the how that always it felt to me that it's not being interrogated enough. So I ended up moving for 1 year back to Europe, and while in that year I got a very random invitation to a studio that was experimenting with this new technology. This was about 7 years ago, called virtual reality. And I went, I tried it on, and I felt it was the most extraordinary thing I had ever seen in my life. It was so compelling to me that 2 weeks later I ended up quitting my job. I was working as a project manager and lead architect in Stuttgart in Germany. So here I am quitting my job, and I decide to brush up on my coding skills. No one had even known that I could code. That's really not something you want to do or are interested in as a design architect in a big company. But here I am taking 6 months to brush up on my coding skills, learn how to use a game engine, and figure out how virtual reality is the future of architecture, because I didn't really know how exactly, but I had this deep conviction that it is. And out of that desire of figuring out how this technology is the future of architecture in the built environment, Numena was born. We're a German company, and these are our kind of 4 guiding principles. We call ourselves post-disciplinary, because all of us on the team, we have a background in architecture, we have a master in architecture, but on top of that, all of us have either coding skills, software development skills, additional masters in UI and UX. So at the core, we're all architects, but we are post-disciplinary to the bone. We also do storytelling. We have backgrounds in psychology and all of these other things that allow us to really look at the built environment and design with completely new lenses. And we did quite well. We actually ended up taking a lot of work that had to do with pure VR development. We went into gaming, all sorts of training applications. At that time, the only kind of people that were developing those things in virtual and augmented reality were people with a background in gaming and traditional programmers. So there's like a lot of awards and nominations that we got, and I'm still quite proud of them, because this is a company run by architects and for architects, so having us as architects kind of go and expand in all these other fields and competing and winning against people from gaming was a very, very big deal for us. So as I mentioned, we work exclusively with spatial technologies, so augmented and virtual reality. We believe that we have to offer both architectural services and products, and I'll tell you a little bit more later about why. Basically, we learn so much when we act as a service providers for design services, but then that influences quite a lot the kind of products that we're working on. So what's the kind of stuff that we do? So this is an example of a product and a platform that we're working on. This is in a category that we call Excel tools for architecture. However, it has also gaming and narrative components. So what you see here are screenshots from an application that right now it's only our in-house platform for design. We're also going to launch next year a public version of it. Basically, it allows anyone, this is actually mostly for our clients, to manipulate architecture directly in VR. So they don't just go in virtual reality to look at how a project might look like to them. It's actually designed so that they're able to grab a wall and move it around, or that they're able to reposition basically any element that's not a structural element. And we've done this with smaller projects for the past 3 years, and it's been an amazing opportunity for us to experiment with the degree of client agency. Because if you're thinking, okay, but a person without a training in architecture cannot possibly design their own house or their own building, the answer is you're kind of right. Of course, they need an architect there. There's a lot of structure and plumbing and all of that that has to be considered from day one. So we're always there with them. But we were really completely blown away by the extent to which, quote unquote, ordinary people are able to make almost 90% of design decisions. And this turned our practice of designing for clients completely upside down, because about 90% of the work that we would usually do with closed doors as architects before the client comes to review our work started to happen with the architect there in the room. With us basically guiding them, but them making decisions about things like where should the porch be? How does the sun hit that area of the house where they initially wanted the porch at 3 p.m.? And we would ask them questions, well, when do you use the porch? When do you drink the coffee in the morning? Look at how much sun you will have in that area and decide for yourself what the best location for that is. I cannot decide for you because I don't know what time you want to drink your coffee in the morning or where exactly you need direct light at what time. And this has been completely transformational, not just for us as an architectural practice, but for people using this tool. They basically leave with a sense of agency and empowerment in a field they had previously thought completely out of reach without a background in a field. So what are some of the on the technical level, conceptual level, what are some of the things that we're looking after and are interested in this kind of tools? We're very big on the idea of designing simultaneously on multiple scales, and I'll explain in a minute what that means. It's basically the ability to make decisions at one-to-one scale about how a room feels. So that's kind of what we call the phenomenal side of architecture, or the embodied side of architecture. So you're able to go to a wall at one-to-one scale and move it and reposition it. But in front of you at any time, you also have a scaled-down version of the entire building. So the moment you move that wall at one-to-one scale, you can immediately look down and see what that did to the whole construct, because architecture has this phenomenal thing that does the ceiling feel good when it's this high? Should it be lower? But it also has a very strict rational technical side. So you need the guide's eye view basically at all times. So we're experimenting with design methodologies that have you make some decisions at one-to-one scale and some decision in this like God's mode view, but all the time basically simultaneously. We have multisensorial feedback included in this, and then a narrative world-building approach to the design environment. We don't believe in design tools that are this kind of stark sheet of buttons. We want to make the design environment itself a beautiful world you can contribute to building. And aside from these tools for architecture, we are still making VR and AR games. And you might say, okay, this is something completely different. But actually, all of our games have a very strong component that has to do with architecture, design, and world building. These are some screenshots from a game called 1381 that we're going to publish later this year. It's a virtual reality game. And these are the kind of stuff that we are pursuing in the game. We are interested in player-generated environments. So the screenshots that you've seen in the game, you contribute and you build your own environments. The environments are not just there for you. We're interested in giving the player control of several architectural scales and orientations, and in carrying all of this through long-form narrative development. So you see, although tools for architecture are one kind of thing, and then gaming is another kind of thing. There's strong overlap. So what we learn from gaming, we actually put into our architecture tool and the other way around. And because we've had this amazing opportunity of working with Ryan and his team on Spectra, we had a chance to flex our muscles and apply all of these things to the bigger scale, to the scale of a city. So we've been doing planning and simulations for Spectra. And when it comes to simulations, we've had for about a year a trilateral agreement with one of the biggest research universities in Germany, the Technical University in Darmstadt. And we've been working with them to prepare a grant application for an ERC grant. And about 2 weeks ago, we just got it. And that's going to fund a lot of behavior analysis research in the city. So that's going to try to answer questions like, okay, but if someone, if you do some kind of testing and someone is in the virtual city and you see or they tell you that they like this arrangement versus that arrangement, to what extent can you trust that? Like, to what extent is that actually going to apply to when something is built? And many, many other things. So basically, we're going to use the grant to develop a pretty solid methodology that's starting to back up some of the claims that Ryan and I have been making. When it comes to process and methodology, we want to make it really clear that we're not just talking about the design decisions at the aesthetic level. So it's not just about move the wall here, what color is the wall and what material. We want to use virtual reality to actually run simulations on the entire process that covers design, community planning, and the economic side of it. So if you go to our website, we have a lot of diagrams like this. This is one of them that shows a concept. The idea is that what you see here is in the cloud, and all of these are blocks in the city. But before building the city in any form, members of the community will be able to take ownership of blocks and then decide where they want to position their block. So there would be this kind of hopping around and repositioning yourself to find the optimal arrangement of communities according to who they want as their neighbors. And we can run this process for as long as we'd like, or depending how much time we have until we have to break ground on the actual neighborhood or city. So here in Spectra, which you can, I hope you'll go and test at the end of the presentation, we are starting with the basic unit, which is quite traditional. So it's like a donut block. But what makes this different is the fact that we're proposing that the community here, about 500 people, will also have ownership with respect to the ground floor of the block and with the courtyard. So what you're seeing here are different possibilities we've been playing around with for developing the program inside the courtyard. And the block decides whether this is something that they might do for economic gain or for other kind of purposes. So here it's geared more towards families and children. Here, this community decided to dedicate both the courtyard and the level below. The courtyard is raised one level up. The level below, which is the street level, to a sports program, and this would be the kind of direction that they would be able to monetize collectively. And because this shows you a collection of 9 blocks, we call this a cluster. And we were a little bit worried in the beginning that we're going to just repeat this donut and experiment with our neighborhoods and our cities, and that might just get a little bit boring. Although, of course, cities like New York and Barcelona are nothing but boring, although they have this very regular grid. But we figured out that when we actually let all the blocks do whatever they want on the ground floor, you have this amazing richness and variety of the ground floor condition. So your experience as a pedestrian walking the street is nothing like a grid-like orthogonal experience of a city, although everything above is quite orthogonal. And here we did some renderings to show how the city might look like when it has all of the detailing and the vegetation, how to just give us a feel of what it might look like when it's brought up to life. So you see on the left again how, although we have a very simple system and a grid-like, you can have intersections in urban conditions that look very rich and varied. And here on the right is an example of commonly owned rooftops.
Yeah, and so the idea here is that this is sort of one city concept that we could go with. It's some urban design ideas that I've been thinking about for quite a long time, and then I got to flesh out and build out with Andreea. Streets that are for pedestrians and small electric vehicles, large shared courtyards and lots of private outdoor space, public outdoor space on each block, and walkways that connect each block, similar to the High Line, rooftop gardens, underground logistics, and it's a density that is kind of modeled after some of my favorite places in the world, Tokyo, Barcelona, Greenwich Village, Lower East Side, and so, that said, this is one version, and it's going to continue to evolve and change as people interact with it. And we recognize that this is not appropriate for every context or appropriate for every person, that there's going to be, hopefully, a lot of different design ideas that come to life over the next few years as we look at different pieces of property and as the community grows. So, for example, I've bought 80 acres of land in Puerto Rico, about 45 minutes from San Juan. And it's very hilly, and it's very rural. And so dropping in that city that we were just looking at into this context doesn't make sense. However, we want to use the same set of tools and the same process for this site that we did for that earlier conceptual work. And so it's now thinking about what is kind of a sustainable farm, ecotourism type of project look like, what types of buildings on there, what's sort of the max level of density either allowed or that we would want to try to go for. And what are some of the, what's the ideal project look like? And so we've taken a LiDAR scan of the property and we brought into a virtual world. So it's actually something we can walk around, not only on the physical farm, but in the virtual farm. And we're just now kicking off the massing and kind of building the building in virtual reality collaboratively, the same way that we built those elements of the city. And what I'm really looking forward to is seeing what other people might want to do with the space. Are other people interested in developing it the same way that the Cabin DAO or the City DAO projects evolved, where we can kind of, before we decide to build, we can kind of get community feedback and build some of the stuff that people express interest in. And so that's what we've been doing and focusing on for the last few months. The project only went live in January, and we've been hosting these meetups We have the PC VR that we have over there, but we also have our world inside spatial. And so we've brought people into the world and had conversations. This is us discussing bike lanes and their placement and the intersection design. This is where we had a presentation where somebody came in and kind of made a concept presentation. This is us kind of talking through and walking through courtyards, whether or not bike lanes would be, whether we should have bikes on the second level going through courtyards or not. So we've been using this platform to get feedback, to get lots of different people inside the virtual world, interacting with it, and hopefully contributing to it. So it's still early. We're talking about a few dozen people, but the response has been really interesting, and we're hoping to get maybe some people in this room that are either a game developer or architect or planner or just interested in creating new spaces to start showing up to these meetings and contributing. And there's a bit of the XR gaming aspects that we can go after as well. So what's sort of beyond just meeting up in VR? What is sort of the gameplay that we can introduce, and what are the reasons for people to go there? So far it's been content. We've hosted some of the folks in this room for presentations, the Geopipe folks that are sitting over by the door. This is their work where they actually make it easy to create a digital twin of New York, for example, and pull it into a virtual world. And this is the farm. This is kind of exploring the farm in Puerto Rico, kind of walking it, looking for the site. Soon there'll be buildings on it. And so it's using these tools. In isolation, it's great. It's great to visualize the work, but it's really, really interesting when you put yourself in the space with other people. You start getting feedback, and it starts informing the work that you're doing. And so that's where we're at right now. To reiterate, we see the VR as a way of prototyping new ideas, and we also want to be prototyping different models of governance and different models of finance. We are building an asset pack, so all of that work that you saw is under a Creative Commons license. It's open source. You can take it, you can do whatever, you can launch a game with it, you can modify it, you can do whatever you like with it, you can contribute back to the community if you like. We are a multi-platform community. Not everybody has access to VR, so we try to make it easy for you to join via mobile app or via browser or in-person events. And so finally, we have a methodology too. So we're figuring out how best to do VR participatory design, which is a new field, how to run these workshops, how to design the right governance layers, and then how to incorporate research throughout the project. And so we see a world where everyone is a city maker. Cities are about having a spectrum of choices. We will learn from the past while building a better future. We all have the permission to dream of what that future looks like, and we are here to provide tools, not the rules, and we hope everybody can experiment and do stuff with us. And that's it.
Please off there. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Andrea. We'll have you back up here. We'll do a slight audible here in terms of how we'll do this. We'll do a combined Q&A at the very end, so we'll squeeze another chair up here.